Amara's trembling hands reached for the shears on the table, their metallic glint catching the faint light of the lantern beside her. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic thumping of her heart echoing in her ears. She didn't want to do this. Her long, dark hair wasn't just hair, it was her pride, her memory of her late mother, and a part of who she was. But Mama Ajoa's piercing gaze left no room for negotiation. Amara's husband, Kofi, stood at the edge of the room, his arms folded and his expression unreadable. He wasn't helping her. He wasn't stopping his mother. He wasn't even meeting her eyes. The evening air was heavy, thick with the whispers of the villagers outside. News of the confrontation had spread like wildfire, and people had gathered beyond the compound walls, their murmurs punctuated by the occasional crackle of the fire they had lit to stay warm. Amara could imagine what they were saying. She thinks she's better than us with her long hair. Mama Ajoa is right to demand respect. What kind of wife defies her husband's mother? Her legs felt weak as she sat on the low wooden stool placed at the center of the room. Mama Ajoa towered over her, her brightly patterned headscarf casting a shadow that seemed larger than life. Her face was etched with years of authority and an unyielding determination. "You think you're above our ways?" Mama Ajoa said, her voice cutting through the silence like the edge of the shears. "Your hair is a sign of arrogance. In this family, we honor humility, not pride." Amara wanted to scream, to yell that her hair was none of Mama Ajoa's concern, but she swallowed her words. She had fought this battle for weeks, endured insults and cold shoulders, but tonight, something was different. Tonight, Mama Ajoa had declared that the spirits were angry. The sudden illness of a child in the village, the disappearance of livestock, the wilted yam fields, she had pinned it all on Amara's refusal to conform. The villagers, superstitious and fearful, had begun to believe her. Even Kofi had started looking at her differently. Her eyes darted to Kofi one last time, hoping against hope that he would step in. His lips parted slightly, and for a brief moment, she thought he might speak. Instead, he turned away, his shoulders stiff. Amara's chest tightened. He was her husband, the man who had once vowed to stand by her through everything, but in this moment, he was a stranger. Her fingers tightened around the shears. She thought of her mother, whose hands had once braided her hair with such care, singing songs of strength and resilience. "Your hair is your crown," her mother used to say. "Wear it proudly." But her mother was gone, and the reality of this family's suffocating traditions was now her burden to bear alone. The first snip was louder than she expected, a sharp metallic clang that echoed in the quiet room. A single lock of her hair fell to the ground, dark against the earthen floor. Her vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them away. She wouldn't cry in front of Mama Ajoa. Not tonight. Not ever. The power in the room flickered. The dim light of the lantern wavered as though the air itself had grown uneasy. Outside, the villagers' whispers grew louder, more anxious. A cold gust of wind rushed through the open window, extinguishing the flame entirely. Darkness enveloped them. And then it came, the sound that would haunt Amara for years to come. A piercing wail, inhuman and bone-chilling, erupted from somewhere outside. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the wind, it was something far more primal, something that seemed to resonate deep within the earth. Mama Ajoa froze, her face pale in the faint moonlight streaming through the window. Kofi spun around, his eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising cacophony of screams and shouts from the villagers. Mama Ajoa's confidence wavered, but she quickly regained her composure. "It is the spirits," she said firmly, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "They are displeased because this has taken too long. Finish it." Amara's hands shook violently. She couldn't move, couldn't think. Her hair hung in uneven clumps, the rest still cascading down her back like a dark waterfall. The shears fell from her grip, clattering to the ground. The wail came again, this time closer, louder. The door to the room burst open, and a gust of wind swept in, scattering the remaining locks of her hair. One of the villagers, an elderly man with a walking stick, stumbled inside, his face ashen. "Mama Ajoa," he gasped. "The ancestral tree, it split in two." The room fell silent. Mama Ajoa's eyes widened, and for the first time, Amara saw fear in them. The ancestral tree was sacred, a towering baobab that had stood at the heart of the village for generations. It was said to house the spirits of the family's ancestors, a source of guidance and protection. If it had split, it could only mean one thing: their ancestors were angry. Mama Ajoa's composure shattered. She rushed past the old man and out of the house, her bare feet slapping against the ground. Kofi hesitated for a moment before following her. Amara sat frozen, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She couldn't bring herself to move. Her hair, her pride, lay scattered around her like pieces of her soul. Outside, the villagers gathered around the tree, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of their torches. The baobab stood like a wounded giant, its massive trunk split cleanly down the middle. At its base lay a small, ornate box, half buried in the roots. Mama Ajoa stared at it, her hands trembling. "No," she whispered. "It cannot be." The elder bent down and carefully retrieved the box. He opened it slowly, revealing a bundle of yellowed letters and a small, intricately carved amulet. The crowd leaned in, their curiosity overcoming their fear. This is yours, Mama Ajoa," the elder said, holding up the amulet. "And these letters, they are from your mother." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mama Ajoa's face turned ashen. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground. "No," she muttered, shaking her head. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Amara, drawn by the commotion, stepped outside, her uneven hair blowing in the wind. She felt the weight of the villagers' stares but held her head high. She had lost her hair, but she wouldn't lose her dignity. As she approached the tree, she heard Mama Ajoa's voice, weak and trembling. "I was young," she confessed. "I defied my mother's wishes, and I paid the price. But I thought I could fix it through Amara. I thought I could make the spirits forgive me." The crowd gasped, their eyes darting between Mama Ajoa and the box. Amara felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. Mama Ajoa's obsession with tradition, her cruelty, it had all stemmed from her own guilt and fear. Amara knelt beside the older woman, her voice firm but gentle. "You cannot fix the past by breaking the present," she said. "We carry our burdens, but we do not pass them on." The villagers watched in silence as Mama Ajoa broke down, her once imposing figure crumpled and small. Amara stood tall, her uneven hair glinting in the moonlight. She had lost so much, but in that moment, she felt a strength she had never known before. The night was far from over, and the revelations had only begun. The dawn after the storm painted the sky in fiery hues, but the village was far from its usual peaceful hum. The ancestral tree's split trunk was still the main topic of hushed conversations, with villagers crowding around it as if hoping it would speak to explain its sudden collapse. Amara, however, sat alone on the porch of her small house, her head wrapped in a plain cloth to hide the uneven remnants of her once glorious hair. Her mind churned with the events of the previous night. The whispers had already begun. She could hear them even from her perch. She brought this upon us. First the spirits were angry at her defiance, now they are angry at Mama Ajoa's lies. What kind of curse follows a single woman? Amara clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. It wasn't fair. She had done everything she could to keep the peace. She had sacrificed her pride, her identity, and yet here she was, the center of blame and superstition. A loud knock on the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Kofi entered without waiting for an invitation, his face lined with exhaustion. He looked at her, his eyes briefly darting to the cloth on her head before flickering away. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Amara didn't respond immediately. She studied him, noting how the man she had married, the man she had once admired for his charm and warmth, now seemed so distant. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do we? Or will it just be you telling me what I should do, again?" Kofi winced, the barb hitting its mark. He sat down across from her, his elbows on his knees. "I didn't know about the letters, Amara," he admitted. "I didn't know about my mother's secret. If I had," he trailed off, his words hanging in the air like an unfinished promise. "If you had known, would it have changed anything?" Amara asked, her tone sharp. "Would you have stood up for me? Or would you have stayed silent, like you did last night?" Kofi's shoulders slumped. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "She's my mother, Amara. She raised me, she—" "And I'm your wife," Amara interrupted, her voice rising. "Or does that mean nothing to you? I gave up everything to be with you. My home, my family, my freedom. And what have you given me in return?" Kofi opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. He looked away, guilt and shame evident on his face. Before the argument could escalate further, another knock echoed through the house. This time, it was one of the elders, a stooped man with a walking stick who carried an air of quiet authority. "Amara, Kofi," he greeted them solemnly. "The council has called for a gathering at the tree. You both need to come." Amara exchanged a wary glance with Kofi before nodding. Together, they followed the elder to the clearing where the ancestral tree stood. A large crowd had already gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and judgment. At the center of it all was Mama Ajoa, looking smaller and more fragile than Amara had ever seen her. The elder raised his hands, calling for silence. "Last night, we witnessed a great disturbance," he began. "The ancestral tree, a symbol of our heritage and strength, has been damaged. But from its roots, truths have been unearthed." He gestured to the box and its contents, now laid out on a woven mat. The letters, yellowed with age, were written in a language most of the younger villagers couldn't read, but the amulet was unmistakable, a symbol of leadership and protection passed down through Mama Ajoa's lineage. "We have learned that Mama Ajoa herself once defied the wishes of her own mother," the elder continued. "This revelation has shaken the foundation of her authority. But it also forces us to ask, what do we do now?" The crowd murmured, some voices rising in agreement, others in dissent. Amara stepped forward, her pulse pounding in her ears. "You blame me for what has happened," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of their stares. "But this is not about me. This is about a tradition that has been twisted by fear and control. Cutting my hair was never going to fix anything. It was a distraction, a way to avoid facing the truth." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Some villagers nodded, their expressions thoughtful, while others scowled, unwilling to let go of their beliefs. Mama Ajoa's voice, weak but resolute, broke the tension. "She's right," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I have spent my life trying to hide my own shame, and in doing so, I have hurt others. I thought I was protecting my family, but I was only protecting myself." The elder nodded, his expression grave. "The spirits have spoken through these events. Change is needed, not just within this family but within our village." The crowd erupted into debate. Some argued that abandoning tradition would anger the ancestors further, while others supported the idea of moving forward. Amid the chaos, Amara felt a surge of determination. This was her chance, not just to reclaim her dignity but to spark something bigger than herself. "We don't have to abandon everything," she said, raising her voice to be heard over the din, "but we need to question the parts of our tradition that harm more than they heal. Respect doesn't come from fear or blind obedience, it comes from understanding and choice." Her words seemed to strike a chord. Slowly, the noise died down, replaced by a contemplative silence. The elder stepped forward, placing a hand on Amara's shoulder. "You have shown great courage, child," he said. "Perhaps the spirits chose you to be the one to lead us into a new chapter." Amara looked at him, surprised by his words. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but as she glanced at the faces around her, some skeptical, others hopeful, she realized that she had already begun to inspire change. Mama Ajoa, still kneeling by the tree, looked up at her with an expression Amara couldn't quite read. There was regret there, yes, but also something that looked like respect. "You are stronger than I ever gave you credit for," she said quietly. "I see that now." As the gathering dispersed, Amara stood beneath the shadow of the broken tree, her heart heavy but resolute. This was only the beginning. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with resistance and uncertainty, but she knew one thing for sure: she would no longer let anyone define her worth or her identity. Kofi approached her hesitantly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Amara," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to fix what I've done, but I want to try. I want to be better, for you, for us." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Words are easy, Kofi," she said finally. "It's your actions that will matter now." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone beneath the broken tree. For the first time in a long time, she felt the stirrings of hope, not because she trusted Kofi to change, but because she trusted herself to survive. The days that followed were marked by a heavy stillness that seemed to settle over the village like a stubborn fog. Conversations were quieter, filled with hesitation, and the once boisterous marketplaces bustled less as villagers carried the weight of unearthed truths on their shoulders. The ancestral tree remained a looming figure at the center of it all, its split trunk a stark reminder of the fragile balance between tradition and truth. Amara, however, found no solace in the quiet. Her home felt smaller, suffocating even, as though the walls carried the echoes of every whispered judgment and accusation. She spent most of her time outdoors, tending to the small garden behind the house. The act of working with her hands, digging, planting, watering, gave her something to focus on, something tangible. Yet, every time her fingers brushed her forehead, she was reminded of the uneven tufts of hair beneath the cloth she still wore. One afternoon, as she was pulling weeds from the soil, a shadow fell across her. She looked up to see a young girl from the village, perhaps 10 years old, standing at the edge of the garden. The girl clutched a bundle of wildflowers tightly in her small hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. "Are you Amara?" the girl asked timidly, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara wiped her hands on her skirt and nodded. "Yes, I am." "And you are?" "Efua," the girl replied, stepping closer. She hesitated, then held out the flowers. "I brought these for you. My mother says you are brave." Amara's breath caught in her throat. She took the flowers gently, her fingers brushing against the girl's. "Thank you, Efua. That's very kind of you." The girl lingered for a moment, as though debating whether to say more. "Is it true," she finally asked, "that the spirits are angry because of you?" Amara knelt down to the girl's level, her expression softening. "What do you think, Efua?" Efua's brow furrowed as she considered the question. I think the spirits are angry because people keep blaming others instead of fixing what's wrong." Amara smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest for the first time in days. "You're very wise, Efua. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl grinned, her confidence bolstered, and scampered off toward the village square. Amara watched her go, the wildflowers still clutched in her hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. No matter what came next. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a knock came at Amara's door. She opened it to find Nana Kwame, the elder who had spoken at the gathering by the ancestral tree. He leaned heavily on his walking stick, his face lined with concern. "May I come in?" he asked. Amara stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. She offered him a seat and poured a cup of cool water from the clay jug on the table. He took a sip before speaking, his voice measured and deliberate. "There is much unrest in the village," he began. "The revelations about Mama Ajoa have shaken people deeply. Some are questioning the old ways, but others cling to them more tightly than ever." Amara nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "And where do you stand, Nana Kwame?" The elder's eyes met hers, sharp and piercing despite his age. "I stand with what is right, even if it is difficult. And right now, that means supporting you." Amara's heart skipped a beat. "Me?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "What can I do? I'm just one person." "You are more than that," Nana Kwame said firmly. "You are a symbol of change, whether you wish to be or not. People are watching you, Amara. They are listening. And they need someone to lead them through this." Amara shook her head, her thoughts racing. "I'm not a leader. I'm just trying to survive." "And yet, by surviving, you have already led," Nana Kwame countered. "The question is whether you will embrace it or let fear hold you back." The words hung heavy in the air. Amara felt the weight of them, the enormity of what he was asking. Could she truly step into such a role? Could she face the scrutiny, the resistance, and the expectations? Before she could respond, Nana Kwame leaned forward, his gaze steady. "There is a council meeting tomorrow evening. I want you to come. Speak your truth, Amara. Let the village hear your voice." She hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. But then she thought of Efua, the young girl with the wildflowers and the fearless wisdom. She thought of the villagers who whispered behind her back, and the ones who dared to defend her. Most of all, she thought of her mother, who had taught her to stand tall even in the face of adversity. "I'll come," she said finally, her voice steady. "But I can't promise it will change anything." Nana Kwame smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Sometimes, the act of speaking is change enough." The next day passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. When evening came, Amara wrapped her headscarf carefully, ensuring it covered every uneven strand of hair. She made her way to the village square, where the council had gathered beneath the still-splintered ancestral tree. A crowd had already formed, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Mama Ajoa was there, her posture more subdued than usual. Kofi stood beside her, his expression unreadable. Amara felt a pang of something, sadness, perhaps, or disappointment, but she pushed it aside. Tonight wasn't about him. Nana Kwame gestured for her to step forward. As she did, the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. She could feel their eyes on her, their judgment heavy and suffocating. But she took a deep breath and began to speak. "I know many of you see me as the cause of what has happened," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "I know you blame me for the spirit's anger, for the tree, for everything. But I ask you this, have you stopped to ask yourselves why?" The murmurs quieted, the crowd hanging on her words. "The spirits are not angry because of my hair," she continued. "They are angry because we have lost our way. We have turned our traditions into chains instead of roots. We use them to control and divide, instead of to guide and unite." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Some were hostile, but others were thoughtful, even moved. "I am not here to tell you to abandon your beliefs," she said. "But I am here to tell you that belief without compassion is hollow. Tradition without growth is stagnation. And fear is not the way forward." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a plea. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single voice called out. "She's right. It was Efua's mother, standing tall and resolute. Her words seemed to unlock something in the crowd. Others began to murmur their agreement, their voices growing louder. Mama Ajoa stepped forward, her expression conflicted. "Perhaps," she said, her voice trembling, "it is time we listen to the younger generation. Perhaps it is time we learn from them, as they have learned from us." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy shifting from doubt to hope. Amara stood at the center of it all, her heart pounding. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't dared to believe in for a long time: possibility. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, it felt like a path worth walking. Together, the days after the council meeting marked the beginning of a quiet revolution in the village. Change was not swift, nor was it universally welcomed, but it was undeniable. The ancestral tree, still splintered but standing, became a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even the strongest roots could bear new growth after a storm. Amara found herself at the center of it all, her every move watched, analyzed, and, more often than not, criticized. Yet, she also found support in places she never expected. The days after the council meeting marked the beginning of a quiet revolution in the village. Change was not swift, nor was it universally welcomed, but it was undeniable. The ancestral tree, still splintered but standing, became a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even the strongest roots could bear new growth after a storm. Amara found herself at the center of it all, her every move watched, analyzed, and, more often than not, criticized. Yet, she also found support in places she never expected. The morning sun spilled through the thatched roof of her modest home as she prepared to leave for another council gathering. She had been invited to help lead discussions about how the village could reconcile their traditions with the need for progress. It was a daunting task, but one she approached with a growing sense of purpose. As she wrapped a fresh headscarf around her head, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Kofi standing there, his hands clasped in front of him. His eyes, once so full of confidence, now carried a shadow of humility. "Amara," he began, his voice hesitant, "may I speak with you?" She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "What is it, Kofi?" He looked down at his feet, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about action speaking louder than words. I know I failed you. I failed us. But I want to make it right." Amara's gaze didn't waver. "And how do you plan to do that?" "I've spoken with my mother," he said, his tone somber. "I told her that if she cannot respect you, then she cannot expect me to remain silent. I've asked her to step back from the council, at least for now, to give space for new voices, your voice." Amara blinked, surprised by his admission. "You really did that?" Kofi nodded. "I know it doesn't erase what's happened, but it's a start. I want to prove to you that I can be better." Her expression softened, but she didn't let her guard down entirely. "Kofi, this isn't just about you proving yourself to me. This is about understanding what it means to truly stand by someone, even when it's uncomfortable. You have a long way to go." "I know," he said quietly. "But I'm willing to try." She gave a small nod, unsure of how she felt but appreciating his effort nonetheless. "We'll see," she said simply. The council meeting that day was unlike any the village had seen before. The elders, who once held an unyielding grip on authority, now listened as younger villagers shared their perspectives. Farmers, artisans, and even children stepped forward to speak about their experiences and hopes for the future. Amara was called upon to moderate, a role she approached with equal parts trepidation and determination. The discussions were lively, at times heated, but they were also productive. One elder proposed revisiting the village's rites of passage, which many felt had become overly rigid. Another suggested creating a committee to address grievances, ensuring that everyone's voice could be heard without fear of retribution. Amara, standing beneath the shade of the damaged tree, felt a surge of pride as she guided the conversation. Her words, once dismissed as defiance, now carried weight. She saw the villagers beginning to trust her, to see her not as a scapegoat but as a bridge between the old and the new. Yet, not everyone was on board. A faction of traditionalists, led by a stern man named Kojo, voiced their resistance. Kojo was a staunch defender of the old ways, his booming voice carrying across the clearing. "These changes will lead to chaos," he declared, pointing an accusatory finger at Amara. "The spirits demand respect, not rebellion. If we abandon our traditions, we abandon who we are." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. Amara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "Kojo," she said, meeting his gaze, "I understand your fears. But tradition is not static. It evolves, just as we do. Respecting the spirits doesn't mean clinging to practices that harm us, it means honoring their wisdom by finding new ways to thrive." Kojo scoffed, but before he could respond, Nana Kwame raised his hand for silence. "Amara speaks the truth," the elder said, his voice steady. "Tradition without purpose becomes a prison. Let us not forget that even the tree, though damaged, still grows." The crowd erupted in applause, drowning out Kojo's protests. Amara felt a wave of relief, though she knew this victory was only temporary. Change was a marathon, not a sprint. As the meeting concluded, villagers lingered to discuss the day's events. Amara was approached by Efua's mother, who carried a basket of freshly baked bread. "This is for you," she said, placing the basket in Amara's hands. "A small token of thanks for your courage. You've inspired many of us." Amara smiled, her chest swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Walking home that evening, Amara allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The path ahead was still uncertain, and the challenges were far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of belonging, not just in the village, but in her own skin. As she reached her house, she paused beneath the sky, now painted with the soft hues of twilight. She untied her headscarf, letting the cool evening breeze brush against her uneven hair. It was a small act, but a powerful one, a reminder that her strength came not from how others saw her, but from how she saw herself. Inside, she placed the basket of bread on the table, her thoughts drifting to the future. She didn't know what it held, but she knew one thing for certain: she was ready to face it, no matter what. The weeks that followed brought a strange, almost electric energy to the village. Conversations that once lingered only in whispers were now spoken aloud, in public, with passion and curiosity. The elders, once perceived as untouchable, became approachable as they adapted to the shift in community dynamics. The council meetings grew larger, with even those who had once been silent finding the courage to speak. And at the heart of it all was Amara, who had inadvertently become the face of the village's transformation. But change, as Amara quickly realized, was a double-edged sword. For every person inspired by her story, there were two more who resisted it. Rumors swirled, some accusing her of using sorcery to manipulate the council, while others claimed her actions would bring ruin to the crops and the rain cycle. The old fears of angering the spirits still clung to some like a stubborn fog, and the faction led by Kojo grew louder in its opposition. One evening, Amara sat outside her home, gazing at the distant hills. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land. Her mother joined her, lowering herself onto the wooden bench beside her daughter. The lines on Mama Ifia's face seemed deeper, her gaze more contemplative than ever. "You've stirred the pot, my daughter," Mama Ifia said with a wry smile, breaking the silence. Amara chuckled softly, though her laughter carried a hint of weariness. "It wasn't my intention to stir anything. I just wanted to live my life without having to bow to anyone's expectations." "And yet, here we are," her mother said, gesturing toward the village in the distance. "You've done more than just live your life, Amara. You've made others question how they've been living theirs." That kind of change doesn't come without resistance. Amara sighed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. The stares, the whispers, the threats, they never seem to end. Mama Ifia reached over, placing a comforting hand on Amara's shoulder. Change is always worth it, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Don't let the fear of others rob you of your purpose. As they sat together, a figure emerged from the darkness, a young boy, breathless and wide-eyed. Amara, he called out, his voice urgent. You must come quickly. There's been an accident at the river. Amara and her mother exchanged alarmed glances before rising to their feet. They followed the boy through the village, their footsteps quick and purposeful. When they reached the riverbank, a small crowd had gathered, their murmurs filled with worry. At the edge of the water, a woman knelt, cradling her daughter in her arms. It was Kojo's wife, Adina, and her daughter, Zuri, who had slipped on the rocks and fallen into the rushing water. Though Zuri had been pulled out by a passing farmer, she was unconscious, her lips tinged with blue. Amara pushed her way through the crowd, dropping to her knees beside the girl. Let me see her, she said, her voice firm but gentle. Adina hesitated but relented, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. Amara checked the girl's breathing and found it faint but present. Drawing on the herbal remedies her mother had taught her, she instructed the bystanders to bring hot water, cloth, and specific plants she knew grew nearby. As they scrambled to fulfill her requests, she worked swiftly, administering chest compressions and warming Zuri's hands with her own. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, Zuri coughed, a weak, spluttering sound that brought a wave of relief to everyone around. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at her mother, who sobbed with gratitude. Kojo, who had arrived during the commotion, stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a profound silence as he watched Amara save his daughter's life. When Zuri was stable enough to be carried home, Adina turned to Amara, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. You've given me my child back. Amara nodded, exhaustion evident on her face. Take her home and keep her warm. She'll recover, but she needs rest. The crowd dispersed slowly, their voices hushed with a mix of awe and respect. Kojo lingered, his head bowed. Finally, he approached Amara, his movements hesitant. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice barely audible. I've fought against you, accused you, doubted you. But tonight, you showed me what true strength looks like. Amara regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Kojo, she said finally, it's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. That's all I've ever wanted. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I see that now. And I will do better. The encounter spread quickly through the village, becoming a turning point in the growing movement for change. Kojo's public acknowledgement of Amara's actions was a powerful moment, one that silenced many of her critics. It also spurred others to reflect on their own resistance to progress. In the weeks that followed, the council made several landmark decisions. They revised the rites of passage to include elements that honored tradition while embracing individuality. The village also began organizing monthly gatherings where anyone could voice concerns or ideas, creating a newfound sense of unity. Amara, though reluctant to claim credit, became a respected figure in the community. Her days were filled with meetings, mediating disputes, and teaching younger villagers the value of courage and compassion. Yet, she never lost sight of the small, quiet moments that grounded her, the time spent tending her garden, laughing with Efua, and sharing meals with her mother. One evening, as she walked through the village square, she noticed the ancestral tree. Its split trunk had begun to heal, new shoots sprouting from its branches. She paused, her hand resting on the rough bark, and smiled. The tree, like the village, was finding its way forward. So was she. Months turned into seasons, and the village continued to evolve in ways no one had imagined. The changes were subtle at first: new faces on the council, more inclusive celebrations of traditions, but they steadily gained momentum. The once divided community found a fragile yet growing sense of unity. Amara, at the heart of it all, worked tirelessly, not for recognition but because she believed in what the village could become. One day, she awoke to a quiet morning, the kind where the world feels unusually still. She stretched and made her way outside, greeted by the faint rustling of the wind through the trees. The ancestral tree, now a powerful symbol of resilience, stood tall against the horizon, its new growth a vibrant green. Amara often found herself drawn to it in moments of reflection, and today was no exception. As she approached, she noticed something unusual. A group of children had gathered at the base of the tree, their laughter ringing through the air. They were weaving garlands of wildflowers, draping them over the tree's roots. Among them was Zuri, her bright smile a testament to her full recovery. Amara's heart swelled as she watched them, a reminder of why the struggle for change mattered. "Amara," a voice called out from behind her. She turned to see Efua hurrying toward her, holding a letter. "This just arrived. It's from the district council." Amara took the letter, her hands trembling slightly. The district council rarely communicated directly with the village unless it was something significant. Breaking the seal, she read the contents aloud. It was an invitation, no, a summons, to represent the village at a regional forum on rural development and community leadership. Efua clapped her hands together, her face glowing with excitement. "Do you realize what this means? They've noticed you, Amara. They've noticed the changes you've helped bring about." Amara's initial reaction was disbelief. Her? Represent the village? It felt surreal. But as the reality sank in, a sense of pride replaced her doubt. This was an opportunity not just for her but for the entire village to share their story and inspire others. Preparations for the trip consumed the following weeks. The villagers rallied behind Amara, contributing whatever they could: a woven scarf for the journey, dried provisions, and heartfelt words of encouragement. Even Kojo, who had become one of her staunchest allies, presented her with a carved staff as a symbol of leadership. The day of her departure arrived with much fanfare. The entire village gathered at the square to see her off. Nana Kwame, now more frail but no less wise, stepped forward to address the crowd. "Amara," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years, "you have shown us that change is not something to fear but to embrace. You carry our hopes with you. Speak boldly, as you always have." Amara bowed her head, deeply moved. "Thank you, Nana. I will do my best to make you proud." The journey to the district capital was long and arduous, taking her through forests, across rivers, and over hills. Along the way, she marveled at the diversity of the land and its people. She encountered farmers tending to vast fields, traders peddling their wares in bustling markets, and travelers sharing stories around campfires. Each interaction reinforced her belief in the interconnectedness of communities and the importance of mutual respect. When she finally arrived at the capital, the sheer scale of it overwhelmed her. The streets were alive with activity, lined with buildings that seemed to scrape the sky. The forum was held in a grand hall, its walls adorned with murals depicting the history of the region. Delegates from villages, towns, and cities across the district filled the space, their vibrant attire reflecting the richness of their cultures. Amara was one of the few women among the speakers, and as she took her place on the stage, she felt the weight of the moment. The room quieted as she began to speak. "My name is Amara," she started, her voice steady despite the nerves swirling in her chest. "I come from a village that, like many of yours, has struggled to balance tradition with progress. For years, we clung to the past, fearing that change would erase who we were. But what I've learned is that true strength lies in adaptation, in finding ways to honor our heritage while embracing the future." She spoke of the challenges her village had faced, the conflicts, the resistance, the heartbreak. She spoke of the moments of triumph, the courage of individuals like Zuri and Nana Kwame, and the collective effort to rebuild trust and community. As she shared her story, she noticed the faces in the audience, some skeptical, others intrigued, many visibly moved. When she finished, the hall erupted into applause. Delegates approached her afterward, asking questions, sharing their own struggles, and expressing admiration for her leadership. One elder from a neighboring village even invited her to visit and share her experiences with his community. As the forum concluded, Amara felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had ever known. She realized that her journey was far from over. The work of building bridges, between people, ideas, and generations, was a lifelong endeavor. Returning to her village, she was greeted as a hero, though she quickly reminded everyone that the true credit belonged to the entire community. Together, they continued their efforts, planting seeds of change that would bear fruit for generations to come. Years later, Amara would sit beneath the now flourishing ancestral tree, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She would tell them stories of the days when the village had been divided and how, through perseverance and unity, they had created something beautiful. The tree, with its once splintered trunk, would stand as a testament to their resilience, a living reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal, and even the oldest traditions could find new life.